At this point, we're now going to look into our helpers. Down to fume effects, we have our emitters. So we're going to go through first of all the emitters as well as all the additional things in here. First of all, we're just going to look at a lot of the standard ones. The first and foremost, the easiest one to look at. So in here, we have all of our emitter types. And essentially we have the simple source, which we'll look at first of all. And we'll go through all the parameters of how it works. This one is the one in the middle here, and what it is it's a standalone emitter that doesn't rely on any other objects. So let's just look at this a bit closer. Essentially, this is standalone as I'd mentioned, so it is an emitter by itself. It doesn't rely on selecting and referencing an object or a particle system, another fume container, or anything like that. So we get to choose the shape first of all, so we can choose from sphere, cylinder, and box. Obviously we also have the active checkbox here, which is the same as the use. So technically, we shouldn't have to have two of these. It's a bit redundant, but they essentially use the same thing, or are the same thing, and that is that you can turn it off or on. Now the shapes we choose from sphere, cylinder, or box, and you'll notice down here these three different categories either become grayed out or active depending on what we choose. So obviously the radius, we are allowed to change the radius. Cylinder, we got radius or diameter and height, and box is all three dimensions that we would work with. Volume shell solid is also something that we've covered earlier when we're dealing with collision objects, but this is essentially, we can choose from emitting from an entire volume or just the shell if we wanted to just emit from the outer area, or solid. At first glance, volume and solid might seem like the same thing, but essentially volume means it's actually going to emit from the entire volume of the emitter. Whereas the solid, what it does is it only emits from the shell of the emitter, but it doesn't allow any objects to pass through it. Now free flow again is something that we can turn on. And what this does is essentially, if we were to move this around, rather than inheriting the velocity and treating it as if it was an object emitting from it, instead it literally will just create a fluid, and it doesn't inherit the velocity or interpret that in any way. So this is good if you just want to have an emitter create fluid but not actually be pushed around and move with it. So one instance might be where you might want to paint fluid into the air, but you don't really want it to inherit and move around with it, just literally create it where it's necessary. Moving a bit further down, we have a lot of standard parameters which we've kind of covered a little bit, but essentially we have fuel, temperature, smoke. This is something that we definitely have covered in terms of what they do and how they work, but in terms of how they're created, this is a little bit different. By default, we have set voxel, and this means that whatever value we have here, it means that is the maximum amount that it's going to create. So if we have it at 100, it means that it's setting the voxels in that area to, or the fuel in that area to 100. Whereas we set to 50 or 10, it's going to create less fuel, which means it's going to burn quicker because there isn't as much to generate. So essentially it just means that these things are going to become less flammable because there's less fuel to deal with. Whereas more fuel means the more it's going to burn and the hotter it can get. The difference is that we can actually set this to add to voxel. When we do this, it means that every frame is adding more fuel, which means things can become pretty explosive pretty quickly. Lastly, we can disable the channel, and that means that it will not create any fuel at all. So if you don't want to create any fire, then you disable it here, and that way it won't actually create any fuel in the shot. It will still create temperature and it will still create smoke, and this can apply to everything. So if I want, I can create fuel but no smoke or no temperature, or however I want to work it. The other thing here is we have this little box, and this is where we can add in a texture. So if we want to do this, it's based on like world coordinates or object coordinates. So if I enable this by turning it on, and then I go and add in a texture. Let's go get material, and I'll choose a noise texture and drag this into the slot. Make it an instance, so if I change it, it will update the texture. And the most important thing is to make sure this little checkbox is definitely turned on. And from here I can adjust the parameters a little bit. Now what this means is that in 3D space, which is kind of hard to visualize by itself, but essentially it's going to pass a texture through that object, like a 3D texture of like fog in a way is one way to describe it. And in the areas that are white, it's going to create fuel, whereas the areas that aren't, it won't create any fuel. So while I'm doing this, I'm just going to select these two emitters and I'm just going to turn them off, just so we can focus on the simple source. And I'm just going to run the simulation so we can take a look. And as we can see, it's creating the fuel. It's a little bit different because of the texture. I'm going to disable smoke so we can really focus on this. And we can see that it's only emitting from a portion of the emitter. Now I could set this to be about 35, a little bit less in size. It's going to be a smaller size. There'll be more it's going to emit from. And I can essentially play with this. If I wanted to make it more black, it won't have any areas to actually emit from, so there's no fuel. As I introduce more white into it, it'll have areas that it can create fuel from. And the whiter it is, the more fuel that will be created. So here we can see that I've created a much more wider area. It's creating a lot more. And I can lower the size considerably to get more patches. And as we can see now, it's becoming a bit more broken. And if I really make this like black and white, we can see then it becomes more broken. And as I retract this a bit more, it will become very limited in terms of the areas that we emit from. Now if I was to emit from an object, it means that we could emit from very specific areas. And this is an exercise we'll do separately, but it is one that we will cover. But as we can see, we're actually emitting specific patches, so instead of it being emitting from an entire object, it's now emitting from just little segments. So this is really good because this is something that we're able to use an emitter and get it to emit from very specific portions. And this is just a better way to get more of a natural kind of, or more interesting effect. Now the thing is, this is emitting from a static position, but what we can do then is animate our phase. So we animate this to phase over time to like 5 or whatever we wanted to do, maybe a little bit faster, 10, a little less. And then if we run the simulation, it will animate from a moving texture, so it will continue to change the source. So we'll get into that in a moment. But next up we have temperature, and obviously we can change the temperature of this, bring it up and down, and we can also set or add to it. So adding to the temperature means it's going to get hotter, hotter, and hotter, and eventually it's going to rise really, probably too quickly. So usually you want to set a temperature rather than add to it, so that way it doesn't get hotter than maybe 300 or 400. Otherwise it's going to start rising up really quick, kind of like how you deal with like a kettle. The steam eventually would start shooting out, but with flames it doesn't look too natural. So the same stuff applies here. I can turn this on and I can I can left click and drag it, or I can right click and choose copy and paste as copy or paste as instance. I'll paste as an instance, and now the temperature is applied here as well. This works exactly the same way. It means that the wider areas are going to have a lot more temperature, whereas the darker areas won't. So this is good because it means that in certain areas the fire won't raise up as much because there isn't as much fire there. In other words, there isn't as much fuel there, and in the areas that doesn't have much fuel, it doesn't have as much temperature. So this is cool because you can get some pretty interesting results that rather than just having fire with a constant force, it all has like different sizes to it, which works out really well. The other thing I wanted to point out real quick is that we have these little negative signs. I could right click and choose a lot of stuff here. So I can actually set like an expression if I wanted to. So if I change to the expression, I then left click and it comes up with an expression, and I can look at a function list, and I can go through and have like let's say a sine wave, change the expression, and do a lot of interesting stuff like that. Just like scripting, I don't want to really cover that too intensely in this DVD. However, it is good to know that that stuff is there. Now, we will cover a lot of this stuff in a moment a bit more thoroughly, but I will leave it just for the time being, and we'll cover it in a separate exercise. But there is some interesting stuff we can do with this. So I'm just going to right click and go back to disabled, which means it's just based on a normal value. Now, in addition to this, well, just to mention, like, we have object distance, volume, smoke, volume, voxel temperature. Essentially based on, like, let's say the temperature. This is another way I could do it. I could say the temperature is based on the fuel, and this is essentially going to be the same thing as this. It means that rather than using a texture map, I can use the fuel. But what I'll do is I'll leave this all the same, and I'll run the sim again. Now we have a phasing texture, so the fire source is going to continue to change. To make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to change my resolution just a little bit, and I'm also going to go in the rendering tab and just adjust the color strength a little bit as well, just to make it a bit brighter, so that way it's easier for me to see it. Now, because we have a phasing texture, it means that the source is always changing, which means we get bits of fire being created that then disappear. So this is interesting because now we're getting this kind of flame effect. Now I'll close my material editor just so it plays back a bit smoother, but here we can see it in a bit of a better motion. There's a couple of things I could do here. Just if I wanted to make this a bit more interesting, I could set my timescale less, and also the expansion a little bit more, and the burn rate a little less. And that way, at least, like, these flames are going to become a little bit bigger, last longer because the timescale is less, and also the burn rate is less, so they will burn slower. So we just get a bit more of an interesting pattern. Now, what I can also do here is bring my material editor. I can adjust the area to have a bit more of a lower value, so there's a bit more fall off. But I can go on the RGB level under output. So this little rollout. I can punch in 2, and that's going to make the whole entire effect a lot more brighter. It's going to double the brightness of it. So when I run the sim again, it's going to have a bit more spread, but the intensity is a lot more bright, so it's more towards 100%. Now the phasing is the same, so it kind of phases very quickly, and again you can change the animation of that to whatever you want, but ultimately it just means we get a lot more control. There's a lot we can do with this. Just before I progress, because I'm going to adjust the smoke in a moment, I'm going to make the size of this a little bit bigger, so that way there's less of it, but there's more bigger patches. So here we have the sources moving and doing their thing. Now smoke is exactly the same, so I'm going to just start talking about it right away. You can either add to smoke or set the smoke value. Usually it defaults to 2, so you can either set it to a much larger amount, which means you're going to be dealing with a lot more smoke, and therefore it's going to have a lot more friction, it's going to interact with itself a lot more. Or you can turn it back and make it more of a lighter smoke. So it's really up to you what you do with that, but there is a lot of different controls that you can kind of implement into that. So all these values are kind of similar, and we know how they all work: smoke and temperature and fuel, and how they work together. So it's more just how we choose to create these.